The thing about pretending not to feel anything is that, eventually, starts to feel like drowning with your eyes open. You can see the surface, the light flickering above. But no matter how hard you kick, you never make it there. That was me. And the worst part, my lifeguard was my own damn roommate. College in America was supposed to be freedom, a chance to start over, to reinvent myself in a country that thrived on reinvention. But when the university's housing office paired me with Jason's 6 feet of quiet hostility and a gaze sharp enough to cut glass, it felt less like freedom and more like a punishment. Jason was the kind of guy who carried silence like a weapon. He didn't need to speak to fill the room. His presence alone rearranged the air, as if daring me to take up less space. He had that all-American look, dark hair, always slightly messy, like he'd just rolled out of bed in some Calvin Klein ad. Shoulders broad from hours in the gym, and eyes that seemed permanently half-lidded with disinterest. He wasn't mean. Exactly. He just wasn't reachable. On the other hand, was loud in ways I didn't mean to be. Laugh too easily, talk too much, care too fast. My friends back home used to joke that my heart didn't come with brakes. Here, though, in this dorm room with peeling posters and shared air, my heart found itself crashing again against the very walls Jason built around himself. The first time I noticed the crack in his armor was one night in late September. The dorm hall was rowdy, beer-scented laughter echoing down the corridor, and I came back from a party I hadn't wanted to be at. Jason was at his desk, headphones on, staring blankly at the screen. Except, not staring, more like hiding. His jaw was tight, his hand trembling ever so slightly as he held the mouse. "Hey," I'd said, half drunk, half brave. "You okay?" He didn't answer, just yanked his headphones off and shot me a glare sharp enough to slice me open. "Mind your own business." It should have ended there. I should have turned around, shut my mouth, and let him have his silence. But something in his eyes that night wasn't cold. It was shattered glass, dangerous, but fragile too. That was the beginning. Weeks blurred into midterms, coffee cups stacked in messy towers, and Jason's moods became their own weather system in our room. He was either icy quiet or storming off without explanation. I told myself I didn't care, that I didn't notice the way his shoulders stiffened every time someone mentioned their girlfriend in the lounge, that I didn't notice his bruised knuckles after weekends he disappeared without saying where. But I did notice, and the more I noticed, the more my chest ached with something I couldn't name out loud. One night, though the night that would change everything, I came back to find him sitting on the floor, his back against the bed frame, head in his hands. His phone lay on the ground beside him, the screen still glowing with a text I wasn't supposed to see. "You're a disgrace. Don't ever come home like that again." I froze. The words burned into my skull. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces fit the silence, the distance, the way he looked like he was always holding his breath. "Jason," my voice cracked like glass under pressure. His head snapped up, eyes bloodshot, cheeks flushed as though from holding back tears. "Don't." But I couldn't stop. "You don't have to do this alone." His laugh was hollow. "And what the hell do you know about it? You think just because we share a room you get to fix me?" "No," I said, my throat tightening. "I just know what it feels like to think nobody gives a damn if you're drowning." The silence that followed wasn't the kind he usually wielded like a weapon. It was heavy, suffocating, the kind that strips you down to bone. His gaze softened just a fraction, and in that tiny fracture of vulnerability, I saw him. Not the cold roommate, not the distant stranger, just a boy as terrified of being seen as I was of saying what I really felt. I sat down on the floor next to him, close enough that our knees almost touched. He didn't move away. And that's when the night turned. Jason didn't say anything at first. His breathing was uneven, like every inhale was a battle and every exhale was surrender. I could feel the heat radiating off him, the quiet war raging in his chest. I wanted to reach out, to put my hand on his arm, but I didn't. I just sat there, close enough to be a reminder that he wasn't alone, far enough that he could still pretend he was. Finally, he muttered, "You don't know me." "No," I said softly, "but I want to." That made him look at me. Really look. His eyes, usually so cold and detached, carried a flicker of something raw, something unguarded. And for one terrifying second, I thought he might actually let me in. But then, just as quickly, he shut it down. "You shouldn't." His voice was sharp again, cutting. "Trust me. You don't want to know the kind of mess I am." I should have left it there. Should have nodded, stood up, and walked away. But I couldn't. Because the truth was, I already knew I wanted him. Not just his attention. Not just his body but him. The whole storm and silence of him. So I whispered, almost to myself, "Maybe I like mess." His head snapped toward me, jaw tightening, like he was about to snap back. But something stopped him. His mouth opened, closed, and then he just leaned his head back against the bed frame and shut his eyes. "You're insane," he murmured. "Maybe," I said, with a shaky laugh. "But I'm here." The room settled into a fragile quiet, the kind that could break at the smallest movement. I didn't know what would happen if I reached for him. I didn't know what would happen if I didn't. The days after that night shifted something invisible between us. He was still cold, still distant, but there were cracks in the ice now. Moments when I'd catch him watching me out of the corner of his eye, like he was trying to figure me out. Moments when his silence wasn't hostile but contemplative. One morning, I woke up to find a mug of coffee on my desk. No note. No explanation. Jason was gone, already at class. But the coffee was exactly how I liked it, too much sugar. Just enough milk. He must have noticed. He must have paid attention. Another night, I found him on the roof of the dorm, smoking a cigarette and staring out at the skyline. I almost turned around, but he caught me. "You're up late," he said, his voice softer than usual. "So are you." He smirked. "Barely." "Touché." I sat beside him, the chill of the night pressing against my skin. For a while, we just sat in silence, watching the city breathe. And then he said, almost casually, "My dad hates me." The words hit like a punch. I turned to him, but he kept his gaze on the horizon, smoke curling from his lips. "Jason, don't," he interrupted. But there was no bite in his tone this time. Just exhaustion. "I don't need pity." "I'm not pitying you," I said firmly. I don't get how anyone could hate you." That made him laugh, not a real laugh, but something hollow. "You don't know me." I wanted to say I was starting to, that every piece he gave me, no matter how sharp, I'd hold on to. Instead, I just said, "Maybe that's the point." He looked at me then, eyes dark and searching. For a second, the air between us felt electric, dangerous, like if either of us moved, something irreversible would happen. But he looked away, always away. Our lives continued in that strange rhythm. Jason retreating, me chasing, the tension growing like a storm cloud waiting to break. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized the truth. I was falling for him. It wasn't convenient. It wasn't safe. Hell, it wasn't even smart. But it was real. Every stolen glance, Every accidental touch, every unspoken word, they were threads, weaving me into him. One Friday night, the dorm threw another party. Music thumped through the walls. Laughter spilled into the hallways, and I found myself dragged into the chaos by friends. Jason didn't come. He never did. But around midnight, when the beer had soured in my stomach and the noise felt too heavy, I stumbled back to our room. And there he was, sitting on his bed, book in hand, like the world outside didn't exist. "You missed out," I teased, though my voice was tired. He looked up, his gaze landing on me like a spotlight. "Doesn't look like I did." I froze. Was that a joke? A compliment? My heart stuttered, and I laughed nervously. "Guess not." I dropped onto my bed, running a hand through my hair. The room spun slightly, alcohol buzzing in my veins. Jason watched me for a moment, then set his book aside. "You shouldn't drink so much," he said, tone softer than usual. "Why? You worried about me?" I smirked, trying to mask the heat rising in my chest. His eyes lingered on mine, steady and unreadable. "Maybe." That word maybe cracked me open. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. It was a possibility, and that was enough to make my pulse race. Silence fell, thick with everything unsaid. And then, without warning, Jason stood and crossed the room. He stopped in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating off his body. "Lay down," he said quietly. "What? You're gonna make yourself sick sitting like that. Lay down." His voice wasn't commanding, but it left no room for argument. I obeyed, heart pounding as I sank back onto the mattress. And then he reached out. His hand brushed against my forehead, checking for fever maybe, but the touch lingered, softer than I ever thought him capable of. "You're warm," he muttered, almost to himself. I swallowed hard. "Jason." He pulled his hand back like he'd been burned, his face shuddering again. "Get some sleep." And just like that, he retreated to his bed, turning off the lamp. But I lay there in the dark, wide awake, my heart still trembling from the ghost of his touch. The days blurred again, but something was different. Jason wasn't just cracks in ice anymore. He was thawing. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. He'd start conversations now small, hesitant ones, like he was relearning how to be human. He'd ask if I'd eaten, if I'd studied, if I wanted to watch a movie. Each word from him felt like a gift, like a secret I was allowed to keep. And then came the night that almost broke me. I came back to the room late, the hallways dark and quiet. When I opened the door, I froze. Jason was sitting on his bed, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. "Jason." My voice was barely a whisper. He didn't look up. "Go away." "No." I shut the door behind me, stepping closer. "Tell me what's wrong." His voice cracked. I can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" "This." He gestured wildly, like the word encompassed everything: the room, the silence, the walls he built, me, pretending, breathing, all of it. My chest tightened painfully. "Jason, I'm broken," he choked out. "You should stay away from me." I couldn't stop myself. I crossed the room, knelt in front of him, and grabbed his hands. They were cold, trembling. "You're not broken," I said fiercely. "You're hurting. That's different." He looked at me then, tears brimming in his eyes. And before I could think, before I could stop myself, I whispered, "Let me in." For a moment, Time froze. His breath hitched. His grip on my hands tightened. And then slowly, hesitantly, he leaned forward until his forehead rested against mine. I closed my eyes, the world narrowing down to the warmth of his skin against mine, the unsteady rhythm of his breath. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. But it was more intimate than anything I'd ever known. And in that fragile moment, I knew. My heart wasn't mine anymore. It hadn't been since the night I found him shattered on the floor. The moment his forehead touched mine, I forgot how to breathe. Every sound in the world dulled. Every thought in my head evaporated. And all that remained was him. Jason. The boy I wasn't supposed to want. The boy I couldn't stop wanting. His breath was uneven, brushing against my lips like a question neither of us dared to ask out loud. I could have kissed him. God, I wanted to. But I didn't. I was terrified that if I moved too fast, if I pushed too hard, he'd snap shut again, retreat back into that fortress of silence and leave me out in the cold. So I stayed there, still as stone, letting the closeness speak for me. Jason pulled back first. Not far, just enough to meet my eyes. His were rimmed red, glassy with unshed tears. But beneath the sadness was something else. Hunger. Fear. Longing. You shouldn't. His voice was barely audible, breaking apart like glass. Why not? I whispered. Because if you knew the truth. He trailed off, shaking his head. I squeezed his hands tighter. Then tell me. He flinched, like I'd asked him to walk barefoot over broken glass. But he didn't pull away. His jaw clenched, and after a long, heavy silence, he said, My father caught me with a boy once. Back in high school. He didn't just yell. He made sure I'd never forget it. The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. My stomach turned cold, my throat closing up. Jason. He finally let go of my hands, standing up and pacing the small room like a caged animal. You wanted the truth. There it is. My old man made damn sure I'd hate myself for who I am. And guess what? It worked. I do. I rose to my feet, heart breaking with every word he threw like knives at himself. Don't say that. It's true. He snapped, his voice cracking. I don't get to have what you want from me. I don't get to be that guy. Not when every time I look in the mirror I see his fist. His disgust. You don't understand. You can't. I stood frozen, his pain spilling like gasoline, threatening to ignite everything between us. And then, despite the fear clawing at my chest, I stepped closer. Jason, I said firmly, you're not him. You're not what he tried to make you believe. My voice wavered, but I pushed through. You're good. You're kind. Even when you're trying not to be. And my throat tightened. I see you, even if you don't want me to. He turned then, eyes blazing with fury and despair. You don't know what you're asking for. Yes, I do, I said, breathless. I'm asking for you. The silence that followed was unbearable. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every muscle in my body braced for rejection. But then, Jason moved. One step, then another, until he was right in front of me. So close I could smell the faint trace of smoke on his hoodie, the warmth of his breath ghosting against my skin. His hand trembled as he lifted it, brushing his fingers against my jaw. Damn it, he whispered, his voice breaking. And then he kissed me. It wasn't soft. Not at first. It was desperate, messy, like he was trying to burn the pain out of himself by pouring it into me. His lips crashed against mine, rough and trembling, and I didn't care. I kissed him back, pouring every ounce of patience, every unspoken word, into that moment. His hands gripped my shoulders, mine tangled in his hair, and the room spun around us. This wasn't the kind of kiss that promised forever. It was the kind that begged for just one more second, one more breath, one more chance not to drown. When we finally broke apart, both of us were gasping for air. His forehead fell against mine again, his chest heaving. "I shouldn't have done that," he muttered, his voice raw. "Then do it again," I whispered. And he did. This time slower, softer, like he was afraid I might disappear if he wasn't careful. The days that followed were a blur of contradictions. In public, Jason was still the same cold, detached, impossible to read. But behind closed doors, our dorm room became a different world. There were nights when we'd sit on opposite beds, pretending to study, only to end up talking until dawn about everything and nothing. Nights when he'd let his hand brush against mine under the blanket we accidentally shared, lingering long enough to make my pulse race. Nights when he'd fall asleep before me, and I'd lie there listening to his steady breathing, wondering how I'd ever lived without it. But there were also days when he'd retreat again. Days when he'd barely look at me, barely speak, like kissing me had been a mistake he couldn't stop punishing himself for. Those days hurt the most. They made me feel like I was standing on a cliff edge, waiting for him to decide whether to pull me back or let me fall. One evening, I found him in the gym, sweat dripping down his temples as he slammed a punching bag with brutal force. His knuckles were raw, split open in places. "Jason," I said, rushing forward. "You're bleeding." He barely glanced at me, panting. "It doesn't matter." "It does," I snapped, grabbing his wrist. "You can't just destroy yourself every time you feel something." He wrenched free, eyes blazing. "And what do you want me to do instead? Sit in that room with you and pretend like we're some fairy tale?" "Can't. I can't give you what you want." My chest ached, but I stood my ground. "You already are." For a second, he froze. His fists trembled, his breathing ragged. Then, with a broken sound, he collapsed onto the bench, burying his face in his hands. "I'm scared," he admitted, voice muffled. "Every time I touch you, every time I let myself want you, I hear his voice, telling me I'm disgusting, telling me I don't deserve this." My throat tightened, tears pricking my eyes. I sat beside him, careful, close but not touching. "Then let my voice be louder," I whispered. He didn't answer, but when I slipped my hand into his, he didn't let go. Weeks turned into months, and somehow, we carved out a fragile space for ourselves. A space where Jason's walls weren't quite as high, where I could slip through the cracks and remind him that he wasn't alone. It wasn't perfect. God, it wasn't even close. But it was ours. And then, on a freezing night in December, everything changed again. The dorm's heating system had gone out, leaving our room icy cold. I lay shivering under my blanket, teeth chattering, when Jason's voice cut through the dark. "Get over here." I blinked. "What?" He sighed, exasperated. "You're freezing. Come here." My heart nearly stopped. I hesitated, but the cold won out, and I climbed into his bed. The mattress dipped under my weight, the warmth of his body enveloping me instantly. He wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close, and for the first time, there was no hesitation, no retreat, just him, holding me like he'd wanted to all along. "Better," he murmured against my hair. "Yeah," I whispered, my face pressed to his chest. We lay there in silence, our breaths sinking, our hearts racing. And just before I drifted off to sleep, I heard him whisper something I almost thought I imagined. "You're the only good thing I have." That night marked the beginning of something new. Something dangerous and fragile and beautiful. We weren't just two boys fumbling in the dark anymore. We were more. Or at least, we were trying to be. But deep down, I knew it couldn't last forever. Because love like this messy, secret, fragile was always a ticking clock. And sooner or later, the world outside our room would come crashing in. And when it did, I wasn't sure either of us would survive it. Happiness, I learned, has a way of tricking you. It slips into your chest so quietly, so gently, that you almost believe it could last. That winter with Jason was like that stolen nights under the same blanket. Whispered conversations at 3 a.m. The warmth of his arms around me as snow fell outside the window. For a little while, it felt like we had carved out our own secret universe. But the thing about secrets is, they never stay hidden forever. It started small. A glance held too long in the cafeteria. The way my hand brushed his on the armrest in the common room. A laugh from him that sounded too real, too unguarded. People notice. They always do. "Dude," my friend Tyler said one afternoon, nudging me as we sat outside with our coffee. "You and your roommate, what's going on there?" My heart nearly stopped. I forced a laugh. "What do you mean?" "I don't know." He squinted at me. "It's just, you two are, like, always together. And he actually talks to you. Which is, a miracle." I shrugged, praying my face didn't give me away. "We're just friends." Tyler smirked. "Sure." I brushed it off, but the panic lingered long after. Because if Tyler noticed, how long before everyone else did? And what would Jason do if our secret wasn't a secret anymore? The answer came sooner than I expected. It was a Friday night in January when the dorm hosted another party. I hadn't planned on going, but Jason surprised me. "You should," he said, leaning casually against his desk. I blinked. "What? You want me out of the room?" A flicker of a smirk crossed his face. "Maybe I want to see if you'll actually have fun without me." "You could come," I offered, though I knew what he'd say. He shook his head. "Not my scene." So I went. And maybe I shouldn't have. The party was loud, crowded, reeking of beer and sweat. I tried to relax, to let myself laugh at bad jokes and dance to music I didn't even like. But every time I glanced toward the door, a part of me wished Jason would walk through it. Instead, Tyler found me again, drink in hand. "Seriously, man," he said, leaning close to be heard over the music. "You and Jason, there's something there, right?" I laughed it off, but his words dug under my skin. And maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was the ache of keeping everything bottled up. But I heard myself say, "Yeah, there is." The second the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Tyler's eyes widened. He opened his mouth, but I didn't wait to hear what he'd say. I bolted, heart hammering, and stumbled out into the freezing night air. My breath clouded in front of me, my hands shaking as I pulled my phone out. One missed call. From Jason. I ran. When I burst into our room, Jason was standing by the window, his phone in his hand, his face pale with fury. "Who did you tell?" His voice was sharp, low, dangerous. My stomach dropped. "Jason, who?" He snapped, stepping closer. "Tyler," I admitted, shame burning my throat. "I didn't mean to. It just slipped. Slipped." His laugh was bitter, hollow. You think my life is something you can just slip about. Tears stung my eyes. I'm sorry. You don't get it. He shouted, his voice breaking. If people find out if it gets back to my family, he stopped, his whole body trembling. I reached for him, desperate. Jason, please. It doesn't have to be like that. But he jerked away, his eyes wild with fear and rage. No. You don't get to decide that. You don't know what it's like to have a father who would rather see you dead than this. The words hit me like a blade. I'm not your father. Yeah. He spat. Then stop trying to save me like you are. I froze, my hand still reaching for him, my heart cracking open in my chest. His words were a knife. But worse than the pain was the look in his eyes, not cold, not distant, but terrified. He wasn't pushing me away because he hated me. He was pushing me away because he hated himself. But that didn't make it hurt any less. The next week was hell. Jason barely spoke to me, barely looked at me. When he did, it was only to throw up walls higher than ever. I wanted to break them down. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to beg him not to shut me out. But I didn't. Because maybe he was right. Maybe I was trying too hard to save him when what he needed was space. Still, the silence was unbearable. I'd lie awake at night, listening to his restless breathing, wondering if he was lying there hating me for what I'd done, wondering if I'd lost him forever. And then, one night, I woke to the sound of muffled sobs. I turned, heart racing. Jason was sitting on the floor again, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Without thinking, I slid out of bed and crouched beside him. Jason, I whispered. He didn't look at me. Why'd you have to say anything? His voice cracked. Why couldn't you just keep it between us? My throat closed up. Because I'm tired of hiding like we're something to be ashamed of. Finally, he lifted his head, his eyes swollen and red. But I am ashamed. He whispered. Every time I touch you, I hear his voice. Every time I let myself feel something, I see his face. And I don't know how to stop. My heart shattered. I reached out, but stopped myself just before touching him. Then let me be louder than him, I said softly. He looked at me, broken and desperate. And for the first time, he didn't pull away when I wrapped my arms around him. He collapsed against me, his body trembling, his tears soaking into my shirt. I don't know how to love you, he whispered. Then we'll learn together, I whispered back. For a little while, felt like maybe we could. Maybe we'd survived the worst of it. But the truth is, the world doesn't wait for you to be ready. And secrets have a way of spreading faster than wildfire. Because 2 days later, Tyler cornered me in the dining hall, his voice low, his eyes curious. So, he said, you and Jason. It's true. My stomach dropped. Tyler, relax, he said quickly. I'm not gonna tell anyone. Jason, didn't think he had it in him. I forced a smile, but inside, panic clawed at my chest. Because if Tyler knew, if he even suspected, then others would too. And Jason wouldn't survive that. Rumors have a way of moving faster than truth. By the end of that week, whispers had crept through the dorm like smoke under a door. I caught fragments in hallways, in the cafeteria, on the basketball court. Jason. No way. You think it's true. Explains why he never hooks up with anyone. I wanted to brush it off, laugh it away, but the knot in my stomach tightened every time I heard his name. And Jason noticed. He always noticed. One night, he slammed our dorm door so hard the frame rattled. His jaw was tight, his fists clenched, his whole body radiating a fury that made the air feel dangerous. "They're talking," he spat, pacing the room. "I can hear them. Every time I walk past, every time I sit down in the cafeteria, I can feel their eyes on me." "Jason, I told you," he snapped, his voice breaking. "I told you this would happen." Guilt burned through me like acid. "It's not your fault. It's mine." "Damn right it is," he bit out. Then he froze, as if hearing his own words. His face softened, guilt flickering in his eyes, but the damage was already done. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. I didn't mean to make things worse." His silence was worse than anger. He sat on his bed, head in his hands, shaking. "He's going to find out." "Who?" "My dad," he whispered. "If the rumors reach him," his voice cracked, "he'll kill me." I crossed the room, kneeling in front of him, my hands trembling as I reached for his. "You don't live under his roof anymore. He can't hurt you." Jason's eyes snapped up to mine, filled with raw terror. "You don't get it. He doesn't need to hit me. All he has to do is look at me, and I'll never stop hearing his voice." The silence that followed was suffocating. I wanted to promise him everything would be okay, but I couldn't, because I wasn't sure it would be. 2 days later, it happened. Jason's phone buzzed while we were studying in the library. He glanced at it, and I watched the blood drain from his face. "What is it?" I asked, dread crawling up my spine. He shoved the phone into his pocket, standing abruptly. "I have to go." "Jason," but he was already gone. I sat there for hours, my notes a blur, my chest hollow. When he finally returned to the dorm that night, his face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "He knows." The world tilted. "Your dad?" Jason nodded, his hands shaking. "Someone sent him screenshots. Messages. I don't even know who." My heart clenched. "What did he say?" Jason laughed a sharp, broken sound. "He said I'm not his son anymore. That I'm an embarrassment. That if I ever come home, he'll have the locks changed." Tears blurred my vision. "Jason." He turned to me then, his expression unreadable, his voice hollow. "This is what you wanted. For us to be real. Well, congratulations. It's real now. And it ruined everything." The words cut deeper than any blade. "Don't say that." "Why not?" His voice rose, anger spilling over. "It's the truth. If I just kept my mouth shut. He broke off, fists clenching. "I should have never let you in." The tears spilled over before I could stop them. "You don't mean that." His eyes met mine, cold and blazing all at once. "Don't I?" I stood there, shaking, my chest splitting open. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I whispered, "If you really believe that, I'll go." Jason's jaw tightened, but he didn't stop me when I grabbed my jacket and walked out. I don't remember much of that night. Just the bitter cold biting my cheeks as I wandered the campus. The blur of streetlights through my tears. The hollow ache in my chest. I ended up on the roof. The same place I'd found Jason smoking weeks ago. I sank down on the freezing concrete, pulling my jacket tighter, trying to hold myself together. But I couldn't. Because the truth was, I wasn't angry at him. I was angry at the world that had made him believe he didn't deserve love. Angry at the father whose voice still haunted him. angry at the whispers that had turned our happiness into poison. And underneath all that anger was the simple, unbearable truth. I loved him, and I didn't know how to stop. For the next few days, we barely spoke. Jason threw himself into the gym, into classes, into anything that wasn't me. I buried myself in the library, pretending I wasn't breaking apart. But silence is its own kind of torture. One night, I came back to the room late, exhausted from pretending. Jason was sitting on his bed, staring at the wall. The air between us was thick with everything unsaid. Finally, I whispered, "Do you hate me?" His head snapped toward me, eyes wide. "What?" I swallowed hard. "You said you should have never let me in. That everything's worse now. So, do you hate me?" His face crumpled, and for the first time in days, he looked human again. "God, no." "Then why?" My voice cracked. "Why are you pushing me away?" He buried his face in his hands. "Because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be with you without feeling like I'm waiting for the sky to fall. I'm terrified, every second, that the whole world is laughing at me. That my dad's right. That I'll ruin you too." I crossed the room, heart pounding, and sat beside him. "Jason, listen to me. You don't ruin me. You make me better. Even when you're angry, even when you're scared, you make me feel like I'm not alone in this world." His shoulders shook, his breath ragged. Slowly, he lifted his head, tears streaking his cheeks. "Why do you even want me? I'm nothing but a mess." I cupped his face in my hands, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Because you're worth it. Every broken piece, every scar, every wall you build, you're worth loving." For a moment, the world held still. His eyes searched mine, desperate and afraid. And then he kissed me, soft, trembling, like he was clinging to the only thing keeping him alive. I kissed him back, tears spilling down my cheeks. Because even in the wreckage, even in the heartbreak, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't letting go. But the storm wasn't done with us yet. The next morning, Jason's phone buzzed again. Another message from his father. Short, brutal, final. "Don't come back. You're dead to me." Jason stared at the screen for a long time, his face unreadable. Then he dropped the phone onto his desk and said, "Guess that's that." My chest ached, but I stayed quiet. Because what do you say to someone whose own father has erased them with a single sentence? All I could do was sit beside him, slip my hand into his, and hope he wouldn't pull away. This time, he didn't. The days after his father's final message felt like walking through fog. Jason moved like a ghost, going to classes, eating in silence, coming back to the room without a word. His phone stayed dark, abandoned on the desk, as if he couldn't bear to touch it again. I tried to reach him. Sometimes he let me. Sometimes he didn't. But I never stopped trying. One night, about a week later, I found him sitting on the dorm roof again, knees pulled to his chest, staring out at the glittering skyline. The wind was brutal, biting at our skin, but he didn't seem to notice. I sat down beside him. For a long time, we just stared at the city together. Finally, he spoke. He meant it. Jason said quietly. He meant every word. I'll never be his son again. My throat tightened. Then he doesn't deserve you. Jason gave a bitter laugh. You don't get it. He was all I had. My mom left when I was a kid. No siblings. No family dinners. Just him. And now he broke off, his voice shaking. Now it's nothing. I wanted to say you have me. The words burned on my tongue. But I didn't know if he was ready to hear them. So instead, I said, maybe sometimes nothing is where you get to start over. He looked at me then, his eyes tired but searching. And what if I don't know how? I reached out, slipping my hand into his. Then we figure it out together. For a moment, he just stared at our joined hands. Then, slowly, his shoulders eased, the tension melting just enough for him to lean against me. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't forgiveness or family or certainty. But it was something. Spring came, and with it, change. The whispers on campus faded, replaced by new gossip, new scandals. People forgot, or at least stopped caring. But Jason hadn't forgotten. Some wounds don't close that easily. Still, little by little, he let me in again. He started talking more about music, about books, about the places he wanted to see someday. Sometimes, he even laughed. Really laughed. And one night, when we were sprawled on the floor surrounded by textbooks, he looked at me and said, "You're stubborn as hell. You know that?" I grinned. Takes one to know one. He shook his head, but there was a softness in his eyes that made my chest ache. "I don't know why you stayed." "Because I love you," I said simply. The words hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. His breath caught, his body tensed. For a second, I thought I'd ruined everything again. But then he whispered, almost inaudible, "I love you too." And just like that, the weight lifted. The months that followed weren't perfect. We still fought. He still had nights when the ghosts of his past dragged him under, when he flinched at his own reflection. But he let me hold him through it. And slowly, those nights became fewer. By the time summer arrived, we were inseparable. Not because we had to be, but because we chose to be. Because somehow, against every odd, we'd built something real. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the campus, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Jason and I sat on a bench outside the dorm. His arm brushed against mine, casual but deliberate. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think I'd never get out of that house, that I'd never escape his voice." "And now?" I asked. He looked at me, a small, almost shy smile tugging at his lips. "Now I think maybe I already have." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "You have. You're free now." Jason leaned in then, pressing his lips to mine. Soft. Certain. No desperation this time. No fear. Just love. And in that kiss, I knew. The boy who once believed he was broken was learning to be whole. We didn't fix everything. The past didn't disappear, and the scars didn't fade overnight. But we found a way forward. Together. Because love isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about showing up, even when the world tells you not to. It's about holding someone's hand in the dark and whispering, "I'm here," until they start to believe it. And maybe that's all we ever needed. One fateful night with my cold roommate had changed everything. It broke us, rebuilt us, and reminded me that sometimes the most fragile beginnings can lead to the strongest endings. And as Jason leaned against me, the summer breeze tangling in his hair, I realized something I hadn't before. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were living. Together. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.